I'll leave you there. Well, hi, we are live, and this is Jerry Gray from Jerry's Take on China, and I'm talking to Wayne Ming, and we're going to talk today about the COVID situation, COVID Dynamic Zero, and particularly why we feel it's necessary. So Wayne is a citizen journalist. He has experience in journalism in China, based in Beijing. And Wayne, I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you very much for coming on, and welcome to Jerry's Take on China.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Thanks for having me. My name is Wayne. I used to work for a news organization in China for 12 years, and then I spent the last 8 years working in various internet companies in China. And from last year, I set up a studio to do some, independent journalism, just as you mentioned.
Thanks. Now, as an independent journalist, I saw an article that you wrote. Now, the article was in Chinese, and it was pointed out to me that this is a great article, you should read it. So I had to go through Google. So there may be some things I've misunderstood about this article, but you responded to a 10-point question that some described as a simple citizen had posted online. Now, that was regarding COVID Dynamic Zero. And I think the questions are valid, but I honestly, personally don't believe that these were a valid set of questions, because they seemed to be, if I can use this word, parroting Western media. And they parroted Western points. The only way to avoid people dying from COVID is to stop people from catching COVID. But this seemed to think that letting it go would be the answer. So the first question I had when I saw it was, I wonder who wrote it and why. And to me, it sounded like it came from outside. So what I would like is your comments on that. What do you think about it?
Okay, well, to be frank, Jerry, I don't know about the author of the article, but as far as I can say, he has some questions, but he doesn't have much knowledge about COVID-19, because he asks some very, very, basic questions, just like, if someone catches a cold, will he be tested positive for COVID-19? As you and I know, that's not impossible. These are two different sets of viruses, and scientists have know more than enough about them and can distinguish them. And he also asked why that the first generation vaccines are not good enough to stop the pandemic. And again, as you and I know that the virus changes so fast. The first generation vaccines are based on they're the first variants of the virus. But when it becomes Delta, Omicron, those first generation vaccines are less effective to keep people from being infected. But they're still quite effective to reduce severe illness and deaths. So from what I can see from the questions, I don't think that's a real serious writer on COVID-19 related topic. He's more like an amateur. But I don't know. I can't say that he's a bad guy or with a malicious ultimate motive. Okay. But I definitely know that he knows how to leverage people's anxiety to expand his follower base. I took a look at his articles. Usually his article each gets several thousand clicks, but that article, after it was published, it went viral online. It got millions of views instantly. Mm-hmm. So I think that guy knows how to leverage people's anxiety and how to make himself benefit from that. I don't think it's a good thing.
I think that's what it was for me too. It wasn't so much the questions and how the questions were posed, because the questions were they're legitimate questions. It was how the psychology worked so that people would feel the fear from the questions. And the way I viewed that was that I have a little bit, very small amount of psychology background. I worked in cross-cultural change management and I studied dimensions of culture, which is a degree of psychology. Now, what it meant to me was that somebody was looking at this and saying, how do we hit the triggers? we hit the triggers by causing this fear. Now, you mentioned the various different strains of COVID, and the latest strain is Omicron, which has been varied several times. It's mutated, but it hasn't mutated into whatever the next strain is. We've had Delta, and Delta was apparently quite serious. Are you aware of what is happening in Australia right now and in the United States right now? Do you know how many people are dying of Omicron right now in those two countries?
I don't know about Australia, but I check the death toll in the US daily, actually, literally daily. I know that even nearly after 3 years after the outbreak of the pandemic, roughly each day there are still 400 to 500 people die in the United States, and the 7-day average daily death toll has been at that level for nearly 1 year. So yes. I don't think Omicron is.
It's currently between 2 and 3,000 every single week right now. So your number of 400 a day is about right. I looked at a CDC report dated the 22nd of November, and it said that in the week ending the 17th of December, so they're forecasting and predicting somewhere between 1,000 and 3,800 people will die. And this, to the United States, is the week before Christmas. That's going to make for a pretty bad Christmas for a lot of families. A lot of families. If they reach the top of their number, 3,800, that's a disaster. If they only hit the bottom, which is extremely unlikely because they haven't been in the 1,000s for a long time, it's between 2,000 and 3,000 for several weeks, several months actually, and it's currently sitting at over 2,000 a week, and it's not getting better. Australia had very little in the way of COVID problems until about a year ago, and they've had 15,000 deaths. They're currently running at about 4 a day because they reduced their number considerably, almost down to 0. And then it went about 8 a day, 8 a day, 8 a day. Then it went to 3 a day for a couple of days. And then 1 month before, in just October, just 6 weeks ago, they reduced and relaxed all of their restrictions. And now it's going back up to 8 a day. So they've had, in the course of the last year, and there's only been Omicron, 15,000 deaths. Now, something that I want to make known to people around China is that Australia has the same population as Shanghai. That's very worrying. When Australia, the country, which has all of that space and all of the wealth and the wonderful Medicare system, it has the same population as Shanghai. And in the last 10 months, really, not even 12 months, this year, 15,000 people have already died. So that's why I think that it's not really the right thing to say, well, Omicron is just like flu or it's no worse than a cold, which obviously for a lot of people, that's true. But for those 15,000 in Australia and those 3,000 last week and the week before and the week before in America, that's obviously clearly not true. So what caused you, what made you think, let's write a refute to these 10 points? Why did you do that?
Well, Jerry, as a former journalist, also a citizen journalist now, I always take it as my primary responsibility to spread true knowledge among people, to make people aware of the risks, the difficulties around them. So when I say some really bad, misleading information, I always have the impulse to refute it. I think it's like that's my responsibility, and I also know that rumors, misinformation can have real consequences in the real world. And if people believe what that guy said in that article, that Omicron is just like a flu, and you can just lie down and do nothing about it. So it is very dangerous. It will kill people. So that worries me, and I took the initiative to read an article to tell people what's really going on here. I'd also like to go back to what's going on in the United States. With more than 1 million people having already died in that country. I mean, in theory, many vulnerable people have already been dead during the past 3 years, but there are still people dying daily in the United States. That's really worrying. So I don't want that to happen to my country. I don't want my country to suffer that same fate. So that's also drives me to do the right thing.
One of the aspects of that point that you raise, and it's a valid point, we don't want that happening here. I don't want that happening here. I don't know many people in the United States, but I still don't want this to happen to them. They don't deserve this. This is mismanagement. This is not the people's fault. But one of the things that really struck me from the CDC report that I read, and this is widely available online, I'll put a link to it when I post this video. Okay. But one of the things that it said was several states are no longer supplying the data. So in other words, they're working on incomplete data and forecasting 2,800 deaths the week before Christmas. That's from people who are catching the disease today and yesterday and the day before. So they're forecasting in 4 or 5 weeks' time, there are going to be nearly 2,800 deaths. Let's not exaggerate them, but between 1,000 and 2,800 deaths. But that's incomplete data because several states aren't providing the information that they need. So it could be that the number of 3,000 that you mentioned is already a low number. Do you think that might be true?
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And also, Dr. Fauci, that guy, I admire him to step up, during the Trump administration to tell people that COVID-19 is not a flu, to get vaccinated. A few days back, when he retired, his last advice to his fellow countrymen is that you should get another updated shot. I think that also tells us the problem, the virus, not going anywhere. We still need to keep our guard. We still need to be careful to keep ourselves and our family members safe.
What I find really interesting about that is you've got almost half of America saying he's only saying that because he's got shares in the vaccine companies. Do you think that's true?
That's what we call, conspiracy theory.
We call it that.
Yeah, and as I know, Dr. Fauci has been politicized, has been, loathed by the rightist movement. But a doctor is a doctor, and has been working in the field for many decades. We should listen to his advice.
Yeah, I believe you're right. And I remember almost 2 years ago now, I was daily watching the reports and the press conferences coming out of Washington, and Donald Trump standing there with Dr. Deborah Blix and Dr. Fauci behind him, nodding their heads until he said something stupid, and then they would just, yeah. So they were giving him valuable advice, which sometimes he clearly wasn't taking. But at that time, somebody started threatening him, and they had to put Secret Service on his house. And I made a comment about this. My God, the guy's only trying to save lives, and he's getting death threats. His children, who are adults, of course, but his children were not allowed to go to work because it was too dangerous. They were Dr. Fauci's kids, and it was too dangerous to go to work. And I remember putting a comment on that. This would never happen in China. Can you imagine Zhong Nanshan getting death threats for giving advice that COVID lockdowns are necessary? Would that happen in China, do you think?
Not now, at least for now. Dr. Zhong Nanshan is highly admired, highly praised, is frequently listened to. Things have become crazy in the United States during the past several years. A lot of crazy things happen. I don't want crazy people say crazy things, do crazy things to good people in our country. So how can we avoid that? I think we should, as citizen journalists, we should step up and we should educate people on such good topics. And we should tell them what's really going on there.
Yeah, I think so. I like Steve Weaver's comment there. I know Steve personally. I'd rather trust a doctor than the internet. And I think that's a great comment. That's the way I would like to be as well. What do you think about the Hong Kong? I describe this as the Hong Kong experiment, Hong Kong relaxing the rules. What do you think about that?
I think Hong Kong had to open up prematurely. And, in springtime, when the latest surge in cases arrived, the health system, the local health system was really overwhelmed. I remember very well, when people went to the hospitals and couldn't find a doctor, they were sleeping in the corridors of the hospitals, or they just slept in the parking lots. That struck me really, really hard. And I also remember there was a young mom who was holding her baby in her arms. Her baby was having a high fever, and she begged others to help her. But no one can do that because the hospital is overflowing with patients. I still remember that. So when we say people in Hong Kong now enjoy a normal life, but we should also remember there are some people who have died during the past half of a year, and they will never have the opportunity to enjoy life with their family member. So Hong Kong have to open up. I understand that, but if you say that Hong Kong opens up without a price, I don't think that's the truth.
Okay. Do you think that Hong Kong's healthcare system now is going to face an additional burden, or do you think they've controlled that?
I think things are becoming a little bit better now. Things are always difficult, the most difficult during the initial stage of opening up, and things become better. But my friends in Hong Kong still told me that the local government still keeps in place many restrictive measures. They still want to slow the spread of the virus. They still want to keep the health system in place. They still want to save people's lives. So I don't think the virus has gone anywhere.
I'm going to just put something up here, which is pertinent to today's news from Rich. Rich is we're mutual friends on Twitter, and he said, "Have we heard the awful news from Xinjiang and the lockdowns?" And the answer to that is yes. Have you heard what happened in Xinjiang last night?
Yes.
This morning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's obviously it's very, very bad news. Something has gone very wrong, but this is not government policy. This is not a systemic system where people are locked in their homes. Somebody has done something very wrong here, and there will be punishments about it. But I'd like to just do something. This is not related to COVID, and I want to just stress something here. Something terrible has just happened in Xinjiang, and it is terrible. And it's made global news, and so it should, because it's a terrible incident that it's an act of criminality. Somebody has broken the law, and people have died as a result of it. That is all true, and it will be dealt with. Now, the thing I want to point out is it's in Xinjiang, and it's terrible, and it's happened. And yet we're getting allegations of genocide, allegations of forced labor, allegations of cultural genocide, allegations of human rights abuses every single day in Western press without ever seeing any evidence of that. And the day that something bad happens, there is a massive amount of evidence. It's online. It's all around the world, appropriately so. And what that does for me is it tells me that everything else that Western media misinformation is informing us is also misinformation. And I think that's something that, Rich, I'm glad you raised this with us, because it really is something that needed to be discussed. And it's for a subject of a different topic. But just today, I wanted to just highlight that it's terrible. It is illegal. It's an act of criminality, and somebody will be punished for this. This is not the government restrictions that said, let's lock these people in their apartments. That doesn't happen. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so let's move on. What do you think happens next in COVID? I saw that there was 20 points released just a couple of weeks ago about easing restrictions. And then suddenly we're getting back into stronger restrictions. I live in Guangdong, and in Guangzhou, just 60, 70 kilometers away, we have a massive number of cases, 8,000 cases, 9,000 last Friday, 8,000 last Saturday. It's down to 7,000, so it's coming down. But because there are, I think, 145 cases inside the community, not in the restricted area, they've now locked down most of Guangzhou. That's now 13 million people. Now, when I say lockdown, these are restricted areas. The restaurants are all closed. There's no public transport operating. You're not allowed to use your private cars or your bikes. You're not allowed to go out except to get tested and buy food. So in other words, this is not a full lockdown. I went through this same kind of lockdown 2 years ago when the Wuhan first started. And Wuhan was in full lockdown. We were in this, I would describe it as a semi-lockdown, but it was still quite tough. Guangzhou has announced they're going to do that now until the 29th. So a 3-day lockdown to see if they can stop this. Where do we go next?
Well, Jerry, yeah, I know it's very difficult. More local outbreaks have occurred around the country. I live in Beijing. There is also an ongoing outbreak here. Several neighborhoods have been locked down, partially locked down around my community. So I know the problem. But hopefully, I always, I'm an optimist, in essence. I know that, scientists and experts are racing against time to have a second generation vaccines. I hope second generation vaccines will be more effective to keep people from being infected. I hope they can come out and get approved, and in several months, and hopefully so in early next year, in springtime, when we have newer vaccines, when we have better protection, and we can gradually lift some of the restrictions. And secondly, I also hope that the virus still changes, still mutates, and generally speaking, it will become even milder in the future. I hope I'm right. And at last, I also, during this difficult time, I hope we can all come together. We can all, get the facts right. We can all, support the right strategy to fight this virus, to fight this pandemic. The only way to forward is to work together. If we fight each other, if we spread misleading misinformation, it will make things even worse. So hopefully, we can all come together. We can all come on the same page to get through this difficult phase of time.
The way I view it on the misinformation factor, 2019, we saw massive riots in Hong Kong, and that was misinformation. That was people saying we want the freedoms that we had under the British. What freedoms did you have? You're 19 years old. You don't know anything about the British. The British Army came in and shot your grandparents when they fought for freedoms. This is how the British managed your freedoms. And so there was a misinformation there. Now we've got young kids who are completely brainwashed into believing that things were so much better when the British were in charge, and asking for Donald Trump to invade, this kind of thing. And that was misinformation. In my opinion, there was no question about it. That was misinformation. Now, last week I did a video about the 2 girls who were arrested in Guangzhou. That was misinformation there. These were not 2 girls who were wrestled to the ground and put into handcuffs for no reason. They were not wearing masks. They had not been tested in 18 days. They were not doing the right thing, and they were arguing and trying to get into a restricted zone, which they had been told, if you come in here, you can't leave again. So misinformation was there. Zhengzhou in Henan province, we've got misinformation there. We've got some people who are complaining that they're not being protected enough, being advertised in Western media, and I call it advertising because they're selling something, being advertised in Western media as they are protesting against COVID restrictions. Well, they're not. They're protesting against their boss, which happens to be Foxconn, a Taiwanese company. So we're getting misinformation there. This is not a Chinese company exploiting its workers. This is a Taiwanese company working for an American company exploiting their workers in poverty-stricken areas, which is how Foxconn works. And they will move out of there soon, and they will move to another country. They're already moving out of China because it's getting more expensive. They're trying to keep their costs down. So we're getting that. Then we're getting other ones like the World Cup with the masks. What do you think is going to happen when the 80,000 people leave the stadium and get on their planes to go home after their football matches in the World Cup? What do you think about that one? The people in China are being told, look at the freedoms they have in Qatar, and you're locked in your home.
Yeah, there has been some debate among my friends. They say that when people can enjoy life, watch games, without a mask. So why should we continue to have these restrictive measures? I always tell them that dead people can't talk. When you say young and healthy people enjoy their life, the virus is still there, is still killing people around the world, just as you mentioned that, from 1,000 to 3,000 people still could die, could still die in the United States each week. So I always tell them that we do this because we want to do a better job than the United States. We want to keep our people healthy, safe. We want to protect ourselves, but we also want to protect our neighbors, our family members. We are doing the right thing. We should have faith in that.
Yeah, I saw an interesting video on YouTube a couple of days ago with the leader of the Communist Party of the United Kingdom. And he said the same thing. He's a doctor, and he said, I wanted to be able to treat COVID patients differently. I wanted to take every single COVID patient and isolate them, treat them, care for them. Those who were going to die, we could look after them until they did. But we knew that we could, if we isolated this, we could have stopped this pandemic. That's their view of the Communist Party in the United Kingdom, which I thought was really startling to me, because I didn't think people in the United Kingdom thought along this way at all, communists or otherwise. And it really made this thing come home to me. With 50 or 60 million people in the United Kingdom, that could have been done quite easily. New Zealand did it very, very well for a long time because they're a remote, they're an island. They could, people say we can't close the borders. Well, you're an island. It's not that difficult. So you can close the borders. And it could have been a very different situation. And that's what I think is the only solution right now, because when you were talking a little while ago, I thought you were reading my notes. I have 3 points before we can have an opening. My 3 points, 2 of yours are exactly the same. The 1 point that the vaccinations need to be more effective. I read that we now have aerosol vaccines in China, and they are more effective. That's a good point. I read that, and they're available now. When they get out, that will be good, because that's much more effective for treating older people. They don't have to have the injection, and it will be better for them. So we could get the more vulnerable people treated. That's a very good thing. I saw that your comment about as long as it gets less virulent or less pathogenic, or if it's not so easy to catch, or it's not so dangerous when you catch it, and the virus mutates into that form, and then we can say it's like a cold. People don't generally die of the cold. People do die of the flu, but nowhere near these numbers. So that's 2 of the factors. And the other one was therapeutics. I think therapeutics, we need better medicines. Now, I'm not researching this inside of China, but I'm sure you would have known this. Are people working on better medicines now? My question is kind of rhetoric, because I'm sure they are, but do you know anything about that?
Yeah. I know I have some friends in the medical community. They have told me that a lot of experts, a lot of companies, both private and public companies, are investing millions of US dollars in developing second generation medicines to treat COVID. And we also have Chinese traditional medicine, and which turn out to be quite effective in some cases. So I know people
Yes,
are
yeah.
working. Yeah, people are racing against time, and they want to save lives. They want to help our society to become normal. I think they are working really hard. We owe them a thank you.
I think there's one company that I'm aware of because I've done some editing work for them. Sometimes I do some editing as a favor for friends. And Guangdong Pharmaceutical Holdings put out a couple of releases last year. They were literally donating billions of dollars, of RMB, not dollars, sorry, billions of RMB to the government, donating so the government could send them to other countries. And this is something that I found that Guangdong Pharmaceutical Holdings Proprietary Limited, I think is GDPHL, they don't have a profit margin worth talking about. Their profitability is something like 1 or 2%. And they have a massive research and development. And there, I think, is probably a lot of where that is going. But they're also, whenever they make money, they use that money to help other people. And I think that's a telltale sign of China's. Now, we're not going to get into politics tonight, but China is not socialist. China is not capitalist. China is Chinese. And I think this is the socialist side of China coming out. Have you heard of any other examples like that? Companies donating things?
I know there are too many, during the past 3 years, it's like, everyone is doing something to help society, to help your neighbors. And I'm moved by, many stories about that. So I'm not going to in the details, but I know people are out there helping each other, taking care of each other. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up a question here that somebody has raised, and I'm bringing it up not because it's relevant to our discussion, but it is relevant to the overall discussion about misinformation. The COVID origins. The World Health Organization has been and has investigated Wuhan, and when they finished the investigation, they clearly said, well, we were helped in every way that we could, but we can't yet define where the origins are. Personally, I don't subscribe to the lab leak theory, and I don't subscribe to the lab leak American theory. There's too many labs around the world where it could have come from. But I know a lot of people point at this Fort Detrick. Have you got any views on that?
I'm not an expert on that, but as far as I can say, I don't think it is a leak from a local lab in Wuhan. There have been thorough investigation in there, and the local lab has been inspected too many times, and there are too many interviews have been conducted. People know things. If something like that happens, there will always be talking. Be leaks. You can't keep it as secrets forever. So I don't. I think it's a topic politicized by some people in the United States. They just want to find another topic to attack China. And they will continue to use it as an anti-China tool of that. So we have to be prepared.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people say it must have come from there or it must have come from there. And the fact is, let's wait. Historically, we now have found where Spanish flu came from, and everybody knows where it came from. We know where swine flu came from. We know where SARS came from. We know where avian flu came from. And eventually we will learn. But as far as I know, this is what I have seen, and I've seen it in medical journals too. COVID was found outside of China before November 2019. So that means maybe it did escape from Wuhan first, earlier. But if so, why wasn't it bigger in Wuhan before that? Maybe it came to Wuhan, and people say the military games were the time, and it must have come from America. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but what I do say is let history show us, because right now we don't know, and speculation is probably not a good thing, because I can say one thing, you can say another thing, and neither of us can be right. We could both be wrong, or we could both be right. It might have emerged different times. Rich Keenan has just put another question up, which I kind of liked. Where is it? He said, here we go. He said, I know people who've had COVID 3 or 4 times, and that's true. So do I. Not in China, but I don't know anyone in China who's had COVID, actually. But in my home in the United Kingdom and in Australia, I know many people who've had COVID. When did you hear of people getting flu 3 times? Well, the fact is, Rich, I'm not a virologist, I'm not an epidemiologist, but you do get flu more often than once, because flu mutates, variations of flu. So you don't usually get flu 3 times in 1 year, though. That's the thing. COVID is mutating, and people who caught Delta are now catching Omicron. And people who caught, I guess it was called Alpha before that, can now catch Omicron. And Omicron itself has many different varieties. Please don't quote me on this, but there's lots of letters after the word Omicron to say people can catch this disease several times or even many times. And I think that's an important point to remember. When you have COVID, you do build up some immunity. Now, what I read yesterday when I was researching for this is that Omicron provides immunity to Delta. So you won't get Delta again, but you could get the next strain. And that's the answer to that. Okay, let's see what else came up. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? Rich says, I've lost count of the mutations. So have I. So, yeah, is there anything? I've got this. I made a comment on Twitter today, and I'd like your comments on this. Most people. Many people, particularly outside of China, disagree with the COVID zero policy. I'm finding I'm having arguments with my foreign friends in China about it, because I agree with it. I'm pretty sure you agree with it too. I wish we didn't need it. And I think I agree with everybody who has complaints about it. When we're locked down, we don't want to be locked down. When we're restricted, we don't want to be restricted. That's personal stuff. When we run a business like a small restaurant or a shop and there's no customers anymore, this is devastating for our business. Nobody wants this. And I think that's something we need to make clear. People are saying, oh, you want COVID zero? No, nobody that I know wants it. But what I'm saying on Twitter is, if you disagree with it, you have 2 suggestions. I have 2 suggestions for you. One is that you suggest an alternative that doesn't mean we have to lose a lot of lives. That's one alternative. We could just let it rip and we'll lose a lot of lives. That's an alternative, but it's not really suitable. The other one is, don't gripe about it anymore. Accept that people will die in your alternative. And if they don't die in your alternative, stop griping, stop complaining about the policy. That's really all I can say to people. If you don't like it, suggest an alternative or stop complaining about it. Because if you don't have an alternative, why are you complaining about something you can't fix? What do you think?
Yes, Jerry, we always should, keep our eyes cleared about things now. It's not efforts to contain the virus that hurt us. It's the virus that hurts us. So we should always remember that. So just as you mentioned that if you have a better way to do it, just open up, lie low, and things will become perfect. I agree with anyone who can come up with such a solution. But sadly, there is no such solution. If you open up prematurely, people will die. People will lose their lives. So we have to, keep that in mind. We have to do our best, to continue this fight, to keep ourselves and our family members safe, to keep our community safe as long as we can.
Let me ask you another question then. Is there a point at which we say, well, that's an acceptable number of deaths?
Well, I can't say that. Even a single death is more than necessary. But in real world, we know that something happens. Bad things happen. But how do you say? With my doctor friends always tell us they want to save every single life. They don't want anyone die under their watch. And that's the spirit we should have. We can't say that they are old, they can die now. We just keep the young and healthy people. That's really cruel and cold-blooded. We shouldn't do that.
I saw a great news article. It might have been from Xinjiang, your old employer, some time ago, where this was way back in the very first wave. Somebody who was in their 80s had almost died of COVID, but recovered. And the process of recovery included a double lung transplant. And it was done for free by the hospital because this was COVID related. A double lung transplant saved an 80-year-old man's life. And I wonder if there'd be some communities would just say, well, was it worth it? Well, for that 80-year-old man, probably it was. For his children, or maybe his 80 or 79-year-old wife, I'm sure it was. And probably for the morale of the country when they did that, it's definitely worthwhile. And I think Steve Weaver, my friend in the UK, has just given me a very good point here. The impact on the health services. One of the things that people don't think about with China is, even though the East Coast is very, very well developed, cities like Shenzhen, they won't have a problem. Beijing won't have a problem providing the number of beds. But what about Changsha or Chengdu or the cities inside of China, Taiyuan? These are less well-developed cities. If COVID goes through those cities and hundreds of thousands of people get sick, then tens of thousands of people are going to need hospital beds that just don't exist. So our death rate is not going to be 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 a week. It's going to be bigger. So it's going to be much worse. And the other thing, what about the culture? How many people live in a small area? You live in Beijing, very, very crowded, of course. But how many people live in a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment? Quite often, it's more than just a couple and one child. We often have 3 or even 4 generations living together in small apartments. And so it's not going to be like America, and it's not going to be like Australia. Would you agree with that?
I agree with you. Culturally, Chinese people tend to, live several generations just live under the same roof. They take care of each other. In my family, there, we have 2 children, but my mom lives in an apartment several blocks from us. We visit her, every week. If there is virus going on there, we would be, scared to visit her. We don't want to bring virus to her. So yes, and in Chinese culture, we also have that slogan. We don't want to leave a single one behind. We don't want to, leave anyone alone. Cold there. No, we don't want to do that. If possible, we want to help everyone. We want to save every life. That's the culture. That's the spirit.
Okay, what about this question from Jenny Peng? When will the COVID situation end?
I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert. I don't want to give people false hope, but we still have some signs that we can identify as good things. Just as you mentioned, if the virus becomes milder, if we have better vaccines, if we have better medicines, things will become definitely better.
Yeah. The answer to this, Jenny, is simply as soon as possible. That's the answer. Nobody really knows. And somebody else has given me another nice question here. Nice question, that's perhaps not the right word. What are the makeshift hospitals for? Do you have an answer for that? I have one, but what about you? Do you have an answer for this?
There are different kinds of makeshift hospitals in China. Do you remember during the initial stage of the outbreak in Wuhan, they have two massive medical facilities constructed in roughly 1 or 2 weeks. They are fully equipped to treat COVID patients. They are they are not like other makeshift hospitals. They are fully equipped to treat patients. But we're also the other makeshift hospitals. We use stadiums to convert them into makeshift hospitals to treat patients with no symptoms or no mild symptoms. It just kept people isolated and stop them from infecting other people, and it also works.
Yeah, so the different levels of makeshift hospital, I'm aware of stadiums being used as isolation centers. So someone who has been exposed, actually has COVID but has no symptoms, can go to an isolation center. So the only people they could pass that disease to are people who are already in the same situation as them. So effectively that starves the virus of hosts. That's a good system. There's a very good point about currently they're building I think it's 8,700 bed facility inside of Guangzhou, and they're spending I think 10 days or 12 days to build this massive makeshift hospital. And people would quite rightly say, well, if they're building that, they must know something. The simple fact is they do. They do know something. And the same as the CDC earlier on we talked about, they know that from the number of people that they have sick confirmed with COVID today, that this many will die in 4 weeks' time. They know this. I mean, the numbers won't be exact. It's not an exact science, but it will be a percentage of that number who will die in that period of time. In the last 3 weeks in Guangzhou, the numbers of COVID cases went from 4,000 to 5,000 to 6,000 to 7,000, all the way up to 9,000 a day. And now it's back to 7,000 a day. Now, that means there are 100,000 people in Guangzhou currently confirmed with COVID, or there were over the last few weeks. Some of them will have got better and be unconfirmed and back in society again. But of those people, a certain percentage of them will get sick. And there aren't enough hospital beds for 100,000 of 20%. If we say that, that's 20,000 people in hospital just like that. No, they're needed. That's why they're building them. And when they're finished, they'll find some other use for them. This is what China does. It'll become something else. So that, in my opinion, is what the makeshift hospitals are for. There are really 3 different reasons. One is for emergency treatment. One is for isolation, which is a lower level. That's not a hospital. That's a makeshift center. And the last one, the one that they're doing now, is going to be, and I'm sure they're doing it in other cities, where there are large numbers, they know in a few weeks they will need hospitals. That's incredible forward planning and incredible infrastructure investment just to save lives. So now we're just going through these questions. Any suggestions for people who want to live a Westerner's life while they live in China? Under this is, I'm sorry, Robin, this is a really strange question. If you want to live in China and you want to live a Westerner's lifestyle, don't come to China. Can you see the question, Wayne?
Yeah, I can say it. I think you have a pretty good response there.
Okay, you can't think. Can you add to that?
Okay. I don't know what he means, when he says a Western life, and yeah, again, if you come to China, I hope you can enjoy local life, local culture. And if you want to say that Chinese people are living a hard life and lockdown, that's stereotype, that's misinformation. We in Beijing, we have a quite long life. Several weeks back, my little daughter went to the kindergarten every day. My son went to middle school every day. We went to the park each week. We enjoyed our meals in restaurants. I think it's quite normal. I don't think there is a big difference between Western lifestyle or Chinese West lifestyle. I don't know that.
Okay, I think it's. I mean, I have some Western attributes to my lifestyle, of course. I mean, I'm a Westerner, and I've come to China. But I eat with chopsticks. I eat in Chinese restaurants. I can occasionally go to. We don't have Western restaurants in Zhongshan, unless Italian restaurants. We have Italian restaurants, but that's about all. I think it's just a simple case of, if you're coming to China, you do have to abide by the local restrictions. And here's the thing, and I get angry sometimes. Let me give you a little anecdote, a little story. I was in Chongqing a few weeks ago, and I needed to go to the testing center, which was in the hospital. I couldn't go to the street testing centers because Chongqing wouldn't accept my telephone QR code. It needed my manual input of my passport data. So I went to the hospital, and they said, you can't come in here because you haven't got a code. I've got a code. It's here. It's green. No, but it's more than 48 hours. You're in the 72-hour zone. I said, well, yeah, I know. That's why I want to get tested, so I can come back to the 24 hours, because tomorrow we're leaving Chongqing on public transport. You need a 24-hour code. And the security guard said, no, you can't. What do you mean I can't? He said, well, you can't come in here because you haven't got a 48-hour code. And I said, well, where do I go to get the 48-hour code? He said, the hospital. You need a test. I said, that's what I'm trying to do. But you can't get a test because you haven't got a 48-hour code. It went on for 5 minutes, and I got pretty heated. And my wife is very, very diplomatic about these things. And she saw a couple of nurses and called them over, and they said, oh, don't be so stupid. And it really just was petty bureaucracy. But what happens to that foreigner, me? I get angry. I said, what the hell are you talking? Because that's what we do. We're foreigners and we get angry. That's tomorrow's viral video on Twitter. That's why I don't get angry. And that's what people who are foreigners who come to China should be aware of. If you misbehave and act as though you were something special, you are guaranteed to be a viral tweet tomorrow. That's the way, or a viral Weibo tomorrow. It's going to happen to you. So that's all I can say about that. Yeah, somebody asked, what about the World Cup? We mentioned that a little while ago. The World Cup. I think the World Cup is a super spreader event, and we'll know that in a couple of weeks' time. What do you think about that? Do you agree or disagree?
I agree.
I don't understand the question, someone said. I'm just reading through the questions. If you live how the local lives, yeah, I live how most locals live. Okay. Well, I think that's pretty much all the questions. That there's a few things in there, but we've covered everything that's been questioned. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Because we're coming up towards the hour now. Let's try and finish this within an hour. Anything that you'd like to add to this?
Well, Jerry, I'd like to go back to the COVID origin topic. Let's remember that why we are investigating the origin of the virus, because we want to understand how it happens, so we can better get prepared for the next pandemic. So I hope people in China, in the United States, or around the world understand this, so they work together and don't politicize this topic. We just let the experts do their job. We don't use this to attack another country. I hope everyone understands this.
This is something that I hear a lot of from Chinese people. Why can't we work together? Even Xi Jinping, at the very top of the Chinese leadership tree, says the same thing. We should be working together. He said it at the G20. He said it at APEC. He's saying it around the world. Let's work together. Isn't it a shame that we can't?
Yes, it's a pity. Geopolitical situation is quite fluid these days. In China, we say that if you want to cooperate, it takes two sides to work together. But if we want to like become enemies. Only one side can do that. So China doesn't want to be an enemy of the United States. We want to work together with the United States. But some politicians in Washington, they're worried about their declining power. They're worried about China taking over them. They're really doing some stupid things to try to hold China down. That irritates me, and that's a really pity. And I also know that people around the world want China and the US to work together. The two largest economies should work together.
I think it's fair to say 87% of the world are comfortable dealing with China, and 13% are what they call the international community, who have 40% or 50% of the income. Robin asked the question, how long I lived in Guangzhou. I'm not in Guangzhou, Robin. I'm in Guangdong, which I'm about 70 kilometers from Guangzhou, and I've lived here for 18 years. Now, before we wrap up this, I want to just finish on one point, and really this is a thank you to you. You highlighted this to me, that there is misinformation without realizing you did this. You put out this report, and I looked at that report. Then I went back to look at the 10 points. And I want to thank you for that, because what you did was you highlighted something. There is currently a massive amount of misinformation coming into China. And what I want people to understand, and we've got 229 viewers at the moment, please share this information, this little piece of information. If you are reading something that suggests that your freedoms, your democracy, your rights are being eroded, it's coming from somebody with the psychology of a Westerner. They think differently to Chinese people. We think differently to Chinese people. And I've studied this, workplace psychology. We think differently. We do things differently. We manage companies differently to the way Chinese people manage companies. And we work as employees differently to the way Chinese employees work. I know we think differently. Please put on your critical thinking cap and say, what would Wayne or Jerry say about this? Because when we look at things, we look at them with a point of view of saying, who said this and why? And generally speaking, it's okay for anybody and everybody to complain about their personal inconveniences during this COVID crisis. And it is a crisis. It's not okay to say, let's let it rip and allow millions of people to die for my conveniences. Would you agree?
Yeah. Agree with you, Jerry. And I also like to thank you for your work here. You are trying to educate people on China. I mean, educate in a good sense. You are spreading common sense, good knowledge, good information about China that helps to bridge the gap between China and the outside world. And I studied English literature when I was at college. I know that humanity is not that different. People have different opinions. People have different different ways of thinking. But we are humans after all. We can work together.
We think differently and we do different things, but we obviously have a guiding light inside of us. For some, it's Buddha. For some, it's Guan Yin. For some, it's Jesus. For some, it's Moses. I don't know. Whoever guides your light, it's sometimes, like me, I don't believe in any God, but I believe that we have something guiding us. And I think humanity is the word for it. We all have that. Let's try and spread this word. China is doing the right thing. Agreed? China is doing the right thing. And while we don't like what's happening, we shouldn't be asking China to change until such time as we know the circumstances have changed to allow that change to happen. Would you agree that's the way we need to go forward? There is no end to this until one of those three conditions have been met. Better vaccines, better therapeutics, or a less dangerous disease. One of those three things has to happen. Agreed?
Yes, I agree
Anything
with you,
else you'd
Jerry.
like to add? We're in 58 minutes, so I'll give you the last 2 minutes.
Okay, Jerry, thanks for having me again. I think our talk is really meaningful, for people in China and also for people around the world. Currently, China has a difficult time. Local outbreaks are occurring across the country, but we still have the opportunity to stop this. We still have the opportunity to protect our community, our family member, and ourselves. And I hope everyone will understand that what China is doing is not trying to hurt people. No, what China is doing is try to protect people, try to protect the people while keeping the economic and social costs at a minimum low. And we have a lot of things to do, and I hope we can do that better. And hopefully, in several months' time, we will, see a clear path to the end of all of this.
I agree. And on that note, let's end it there. Thank you very much, Wayne Ming. And thank you very much, everybody who's listening to Jerry's take on China. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And good night, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Jerry.